off tonight with some opening thoughts on allies and allyship from the perspective of a queer person, yours truly, and also to share some thoughts from other LGBTQ plus folks in our Generous Space community, which we kind of crowdsourced online. My hope in the next 15 minutes is to queer the idea of allyship. In other words, I want to shake it up and turn it inside out, break it out of its box, in case you've never heard queer used as a verb before. The word queer is queerer than you knew. It's multifaceted, it's sometimes a slippery word, even when it's used as a noun. You have to handle it with care. It has baggage, and it has beauty. And it can elicit polar opposite responses within the LGBTQ community, let alone outside the community. Much like the word ally. Ally is just as slippery and tricky a word. And I think that's especially true in Christian LGBTQ contexts. Now, I won't assume that just because you showed up tonight, you consider yourself an LGBTQ ally. Some of you are LGBTQ yourselves, though I believe we need to be allies too. I'm going to talk more about it in a bit. I'm willing to bet a bunch of you are primarily here to see Sarah. And honestly, I don't blame you. She's on a very short list of Christians who I would probably follow on Instagram even if I didn't know they approved of my gay marriage. I'm a big fan, so I'm excited to hear from her too. But just theoretically, let's say that I met you as you came in the door tonight. I wasn't running around figuring out sounds. I actually said hi to you. And you introduced yourself to me as an ally. With that word, you could be implying a lot of different things. And that sets us up for some misunderstandings. More likely than not, it sets me up for disappointment. By ally, you could simply want me to understand that you're not LGBTQ yourself. You might be using it as a way to state that you're straight and cisgender. And FYI, cisgender, or the short form cis, means that your gender identity matches the sex that the doctor said you were when you were born. So it means that you're not trans. Some of you will be leaving with a brand new adjective for yourselves tonight. Congratulations. So by ally, you might be trying to say, I'm straight and cis, I'm not queer. Or, by ally, you could be trying to tell me that you don't consider yourself homophobic, or transphobic, or biphobic. You want to be kind to LGBTQ people, and you want them to thrive, even though you yourself might hold a traditional theology. By ally, you could be indicating that you've got LGBTQ terminology down. You are an ally because you already knew what cisgender meant. You already knew that queer could be a verb even before I told you. You know what to say and you know what not to say to avoid offending people. Or maybe by saying, I'm an ally, you're referencing a specific belief. You're using it as a shorthand to tell me that you hold an affirming theology, that you affirm same-sex intimate relationships and all gender identities and expressions. The problem is that none of those meanings of ally I've just named hold water in the LGBTQ community at large. For us, allyship isn't simply being straight or cis, being nice, knowing terminology, or even holding affirming beliefs. It's far more active and intentional than that. Allies are actively leveraging their privilege, resisting injustice, and advocating for LGBTQ equality in their churches and in society at large. In other words, if you're an ally, we need to see the receipts. Unfortunately, our headaches with the word ally don't end there, because even those who are attempting to be active and intentional in their allyship can still make queer folks weary and wary of the term when they perform their allyship with the wrong motives or succumb to a bunch of pitfalls that I'm going to name near the end. To top it all off, some of those among us with pacifist tendencies don't like how ally is drawn from the terminology of war. Rachel Held Evans, whom we've adopted as one of our straight cis patron saints, did not really resonate with the term ally for this reason. She wasn't keen on the idea of being primarily united by a common enemy, and I respect that. As someone who grew up in relative peace and learned my history in French and never played the board game Risk, I did not even make this war connection until embarrassingly recently. But anyway, because of all of this accumulated baggage around ally, other words have been suggested as replacements. Some draw on that same vocabulary of war, but have more of a conniving criminality to them. Words like accomplice or turncoat, suggesting that their namesakes must betray their own privilege, weaponize their privilege, and bear the responsibility, the risk, and the consequences alongside folks on the margins. Other suggested replacements are a bit softer, like advocate or supporter. Now, I definitely wouldn't fault you if you wanted to choose an alternate term in an attempt to return us to this kind of working relationship that we're hoping for. I guess I'm just a realist, and I'm not convinced that these newer terms are going to catch on broadly. I was chatting with my colleague Jamie, and you met him earlier. He's a writer as well, and he noted that all words tend to have some level of drift from their original intended meaning. So instead of replacing ally, maybe my energy would be better spent redefining it, snatching it back from where it's drifted. And that conversation made me want to look up the original meaning of ally. Now, this is nothing new for me. My friends call me etymology Beth. I'm a word nerd. Turns out, ally originated long before World War II in the 13th century. It's from the French allier, told you I was in French immersion, and it means to unite, to bind or tie together, to join in marriage, to make kin. Now those are promising origins, I think. Ally started as this beautiful word, and it started as a verb, to ally. I learned that it wasn't even used as a noun until a couple centuries later. So how do we bring out the beauty and try to strip some of the baggage from ally? I think one way is to try to reclaim its original verbiness, to stop pretending that it's a noun, a state of being, an identity we can claim and sort of chisel into our permanent identity. Instead of saying, I am an ally, we could say, I'm practicing allyship. If you got our little handout, you notice that that's what's in there. Or even, I'm trying to be an ally to LGBTQ people. I'm working on allyship. Using it in these ways will hopefully remind you that no matter how much allying you did today, you can't just sit back and rest on your laurels and pretend that you've now earned a title. You start back at square one the next day. To use Vincent Mousseau's image, tomorrow you get a fresh ally card to fill. You're in process. You're on the way to allyship. And there's always more for you to learn and to do. There's always more for me to learn and to do too, because even though I'm queer, I'm also practicing allyship. And I hope that all of the LGBTQ folks in this room are doing the same. We can't pretend this is a room full of allies on one side and LGBTQ people on the other. Let's queer that binary, shall we? All of us are called to allyship with oppressed communities who we don't belong to. And almost all of us in this room have probably benefited from the allyship of others at some time. I notice there are a lot of women here. How many of you can think of men in your lives who have practiced allyship towards you in their feminism? A few people? Yeah? Some good men. In my case, as a cisgender person, I try to be an ally to transgender and non-binary people, which means not always assuming everybody is a woman and a man, like I just did. As a white person, I'm fumbling along in my attempts to ally with people of color. And as a settler, I try to figure out how to do my land acknowledgements well, but also do more than that in my practice of allyship toward First Nation folks. And of course, some people intersect many of these different identities and ones I haven't named. So we can't pick and choose who we want to ally with and who we don't. In a paraphrase of that great Bishop Tutu quote that Wendy has tattooed on her forearm, if I diminish you, I diminish myself. If I diminish anyone, I diminish myself. I've been humbled in many of my allyship attempts just this week. I think we can agree that allyship is not straightforward, pun very much intended. It involves the constant self-interrogation of our assumptions and our motives and keeping our radar active to read the power dynamics in the room. Sometimes they're shifting dynamics, so that we can make educated guesses about our best course of action, because this is about action. Ally is a verb. For example, wearing your rainbow ally button, which you might pick up on our resource table at the end, in your non-affirming church, for a donation, yes, thank you, Wendy. Let's keep that in the forefront. Wearing that button in your non-affirming church is a fantastic way to instigate conversation and to signal that you might be a safer person for someone to come out to. Wearing that same button to a poetry slam on Commercial Drive will likely be perceived as maybe more of an attempt to prove your wokeness. Same action, different context, different dynamics. So people who are practicing allyship, remember that good language, need to be always asking, what's my motive here? How do I think this will be read? What does this accomplish? Is this the right context for me to tell a First Nations friend, I'm sorry on behalf of settlers, or would that only center me and my need for absolution right now? Is this transphobic Facebook post a good place for me to share what I've learned from my trans friends? Maybe. But at this rally, should I direct the reporter to speak to a trans organizer? Probably. Should I remain in this non-affirming Christian community and try to change it from the inside? Or would that be complicity? Or should I leave and make a statement by leaving? Or would that be abandoning my duties? Should I ask a queer person how to proceed? Or would that burden them? How can I leverage my privilege, my unearned advantages in this situation? Sometimes there isn't a correct answer. There are best practices, but there might not be one correct answer because different people in different marginalized groups have different histories, different traumas sometimes, different needs, and they'll ask different things from you. And sometimes I think God asks different things from different allies, wiring us in different ways. Some of us are bridge builders. Some of us are prophets. This can feel like you're set up to be criticized, like you're set up to fail. It can be exhausting, and it can be frustrating. But of course, not as exhausting and frustrating as actually being in that oppressed group and having no choice but to engage in that kind of constant radar analysis. Marginalized folks can't opt out of reading the room to see what their next best move might be so they can have the best crack at communicating, at belonging, in some cases at surviving. I was putting the finishing touches on this, well, to be honest, this afternoon, but I was working on it this morning. And during that time, my wife was stressing out about whether she should call me her roommate or her wife in a talk she was giving about the Enneagram. Nothing to do with that, when there's the possibility of a homophobic person being present. And it was kind of hit home to me once again. So it's our calling as people working on our allyship to take on some of that complexity alongside marginalized people, to make mistakes, to be teachable, to do better when we know better. It's our calling to walk into the trenches in humility, whether you want to talk about war trenches or maybe garden trenches, right? Whatever you prefer. And to stand shoulder to shoulder with those who are not there by choice. It's our calling to do, to ally, to do the next tangible thing we can do. So to those who are practicing allyship in this room, I want to say thank you. Your support, your in the trenches solidarity, resisting injustice with people like me is crucial. And I also want to say, now is the time. Lives are on the line. Lives of people that I talk to in my work every week. So let's keep exhorting each other to hone our ally game and to pull each other away from common ally pitfalls, to pull away from those savior and missionary complexes, from our tendency to treat marginalized groups like victims and to create dependencies. Let's pull away from our paternalistic trap of thinking we know better than they do. Let's avoid seeking seeing what aspect of allyship is most trendy and sexy right now, and swooping in the wake of media coverage and emergencies. Let's pull away from our guilt-drivenness, where we risk using the struggles of others for our own therapeutic needs, and away from our human desire to check boxes, earn badges, rack up wokeness points, and ask for cookies. Away from those things, and toward real allyship, which I think is basically Christ-likeness. It's self-emptying love. It's not considering our status something to be used to our own advantage, rather making ourselves nothing, taking the very nature of a servant, and becoming obedient to death. Literal death, perhaps, but also the small, repetitive deaths of 100 humbling moments. That's allyship. That's being united and tied up together, being kin in all of this. Because as wiser people than me have quipped, our liberation is bound up together. There's so many stories I could tell of ways allies have blessed me. I know this ally who would come to our Generous Space camp-out events every year, where we were using these composting toilets, and would literally haul shit for queer people. Take our crap away. That's allyship. Sorry to break it to you. One of my favorite allies is a semi-retired guy who, when I had the crazy idea of launching a church called Open Way, but didn't want to attempt it as a solo pastor, said, "I'll co-pastor with you. Let's make this happen." I also know allies who pray like hell for our community. And I know allies who give money. More on that later. Another great way to ally is to share your ally story when you think it might mobilize or inspire others to show up more fully on this shared way of solidarity. And that's what we've asked Sarah Bessie to come and do for us tonight. She is the bait, friends. We have shamelessly used her to get you here. And we've asked her to leverage her privilege and her well-deserved fame, and like a good ally, she said yes. So in case you don't know about Sarah, she comes to us all the way from Abbotsford. Shout out to Abbotsford. Any Abbotsford folks? Whoa, there's a good contingent here. Yeah. Where she lives with her husband Brian and her 4 children. She was a very avid blogger when blogging was a big thing. I remember following her blog. Blogging is not as big of a thing anymore. Now she does more speaking. She's a co-curator of Evolving Faith Conference. Anyone there this year? Couple? Yeah, hey. And she has written 3 books: Jesus Feminist, Out of Sorts, Making Peace with an Evolving Faith, and her most recent one, which I just finished this week, Miracles and Other Reasonable Things. And I want to read you, before she comes up, just one paragraph. I was joking I would do a full audiobook recording tonight. I want to read one paragraph because it sounded particularly queer to me. We'll see what you think. This is from her last chapter, which makes everybody cry. It's called Benediction. And she says, "Here's something audacious. I pray that you would experience the weirdness of the divine love in ways that leave you disoriented. I pray that you would be caught off guard when God meets you outside of the boxes you've constructed and yet remains in the places you vacated. I pray you will bless the box you once needed for God and that you will treat it tenderly even as you leave it behind you. As you reorient to God over and over again, may you embrace the ones who were taught to distrust and be loved by ones you don't understand. May you become friends with your own limits." With that, welcome Sarah Bessie.